Namaste to all our viewers in Bharat and outside of Bharat. Welcome to yet another episode of The Show presented by Kala, crazy about art and literature and arts in association with Let's Talk. Let's Talk creates safe and reflective spaces for meaningful conversations, spaces where we connect, listen, and grow together. This episode is also being recorded and will be shared on the Kala YouTube channel at Sanjay Chandra 5376. Please subscribe to the channel for more such conversations. So let me welcome to our guest today evening, Shri Colonel Madhur Goyal to
Thank you.
SM to our episode. He is no stranger to the show. He has already appeared once in December 2025. Welcome, Colonel, to the show.
Thank you so much, Dwardhanji. Thank you so much.
And let me now give a brief introduction of the guest. Colonel Madhur Goyal, SM, is a retired Indian Army officer with a service record that includes counter-terrorist operations in the Kashmir Valley and deployment on the Siachen Glacier. An alumnus of the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun, he holds a degree in science and master's degree in management. He was awarded Sena Medal Gallantry by the President of India for leading a tactical operation in Kashmir that resulted in the neutralization of 10 foreign terrorists. His previous publications include Wayfare of a Soldier, a memoir detailing his 34-year military career, The Smoking Hookah, an analysis of veteran perspectives beyond active service, and a Hindi poetry collection, Sur Madhur Sankalan. His writing integrates 3 decades of tactical field experience with historic and strategic research. By applying military precision to literary subjects, he documents the evolving security and historical narratives of the Indian subcontinent. Now, let me also give a very brief introduction about the book that he has published very recently. Kashmira, Ashok and the Crescent is a study of Kashmir's history, geography, culture, and geopolitical significance. The text examines the region from the era of Emperor Ashok to contemporary strategic affairs, documenting the influence of various civilizations, faiths, and conquest. It is structured as an exploration of region's development and its role in modern international relations. The book is intended as a reference for students, educators, and general readers interested in military history and strategic affairs. It combines archaeological, theological, and tactical perspectives to provide a comprehensive overview of the region's historical conflicts and current status. Welcome, Colonel, to the show.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
So let me begin by asking you one question. Is that, there are a lot of wars which are taking place today. One is between Russia and Ukraine, and the second one is between Iran and versus US and Israel on the other side. My question is that, do you think that today the way wars are being fought is qualitatively different from the way they were fought, let's say, in early part of the 2000 or even beyond, before that?
Yes, certainly. Uh, with this modern age, modern technology, modern weapons, and the strategies, uh, the warfare has also changed. The dimension has totally differed. Earlier, it was a simple conventional war where you required ground troops. The objective was to capture the ground. And to capture the ground, you had to move boots on ground. They would move ahead with the help of the cover fire of the Air Force and supporting artillery. There was a proper combat between the soldiers of the two nations or whosoever is fighting. But now, if you see the way the technology has developed, we have missiles, we have drones, we have long range weapons. Even our Air Force, they don't even have to enter the foreign space from our own space. they can hit for uh, 300 to 400 to 500 kilometers. So uh, the warfare has tremendously changed. There's no doubt in it.
Okay. So my next question is that do you think because of this change in the technology or the employment of technology like drones or AI in the warfare, do you think the relevance of armed forces, the boots on the ground, has to that extent become less relevant and less important?
Not really. It all depends on the objective. To defend your nation, you need boots on ground. You have to maintain the sanctity of the entire borders, whether it be international border, be it LOC or the LAC or the AGPL. Everywhere you have to have boots on ground. Ultimately, uh, even if you have neutralized a place, let's say your area of 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, you have created a barrage of artillery or missiles and neutralize that area. But still, that area remains barren till the time you go and physically capture the ground. The biggest problem what USA is facing in Iran, they may have fired numerous missiles. It is becoming very difficult for them to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Why? Because the entire coastal area of Hormuz is inhabited or fully deployed with the Iranian army. So any ship, anybody moving through that strait
Hmm.
is taken care of by the boots on ground of the Iranian army. And to incapacitate that, the US or the Israel, they have no other option but to physically move there and clear that area, which is very difficult for them. Even they are having questions on that.
So what you are saying is that with the technology or air superiority and the technology that you are using, you may gain an advantage, but finally for you to secure a victory, you need the ground forces and they have to be deployed.
Have to be, undoubtedly.
My next question is that the kind of technology progress that we are making, particularly now also in the case of robots, do you think at some point of time in future, maybe 5 years from today or 10, 20 years from today, robots will replace the soldiers?
The technology has already come up. Uh, we see a lot of the photographs, we see a lot of videos where robots have been used
Hmm.
and they have been trained to hold a gun or to fire. So all those things are coming up.
Hmm.
I don't deny that this AI in the form of robots uh, will be used. They will be used, they can be used, and they should be used. No doubt in it. But the human factor will always remain.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's finally to the decision to start the war and end the war will be a human decision. But to an extent, I think humans will get replaced with technology is what I thought is the trend of future.
Yes, with technology developing and reaching to that heights, there's no doubt in it that it has eased the burden of a soldier, it has eased the burden of a corporate, it has eased the burden of a laborer or even a farmer.
Hmm.
There is
Yeah.
no doubt in it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it is the human factor which has to command.
One question that I thought I wanted to ask you was that with this development of technology, the cost of war, is it going down? Like, for example, earlier you had to have airplanes to carry out the bombing, but now with the drones which are manufactured at fraction of the cost of the aeroplane, uh, do you think the cost is going down, and because of that maybe it is becoming easier for decision makers to start a war?
We come to the same topic, boots on ground or technology.
Yeah.
Similarly, here we talk of a combat aircraft or we talk of a missile or drone.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are limitations. A combat aircraft, a multi role aircraft, has got its own advantages,
Mm.
while a missile has its own advantages, and a drone. Drone is a weapon system which is used for a uh, shorter distance. Whereas a missile, we have different types of missiles which have which are of different distances. So those can be used on a specific target. But in a combat aircraft, A combat aircraft is a multi-role requirement. It is doing the job of all the three.
Mm.
It is doing strafing also on ground, on the bunkers, on the soldiers. It is doing firing missiles from air. It is firing at the ships. When it comes in contact with another enemy aircraft,
Mm.
that's the time it's doing its actual role. This way, we even have questions for the Navy also.
Yeah.
We talked about Army, you talked about the Air Force. Now we have the even for Navy.
Yeah.
Now in Navy, we have such large ships. We have ships like U.S. Ship Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah. Yeah.
aircraft carrier, probably the world's largest aircraft carrier. But ultimately, it had to turn back. Why? Because it became such a lucrative target, and it's such a costly weapon system. It's such a big platform.
Mm.
It's a sitting duck. And imagine if it goes down, if it sinks, the impact it's going to have on its country.
Yeah.
Slowly, steadily, as the technology is developing, there is no doubt that the countries are now uh, opting out from certain weapon systems and trying to give way to the better ones, which are going to be used more in future, like missiles, drones. So
Mm.
these type of weapon systems are being added up even more. So things are changing.
I think future, the country which invests in the newer technology and adopts the newer technology faster will, I think, be better placed in defending itself.
Yes, no doubt in it. No doubt in it.
Now, coming to your book about Kashmir, the book that you have written, latest book. One thing before we get into the book itself is that I wanted to ask you about is when we talk about Kashmir, generally we will always find a reference to Kashmiriyat, whether it's a political discussion, whether it's a diplomatic discussion, or in media also. So, what according to you means Kashmiriyat? How do you look at it? How do you define it?
Kashmiriyat is the basic essence. It is the layered synthesis of various cultures which have come into Kashmir. Syncretism, that is what is Kashmiriyat. I'll just, if you permit me, I'll just read out a small paragraph from my book
Please
on
go.
Kashmiriyat,
Please.
which gives the correct essence.
Yeah.
One question always haunted me, the term Kashmiriyat, which is often used in all forums of discussion today globally. What does it really mean and signify? The tapestry of Kashmiriyat. Through these centuries, Kashmir's cultural identity evolved as a layered synthesis. From Hindu Shaivism, Kashmir inherited its intellectual rigor, philosophical depth, and artistic creativity. That is from Hindu Shaivism. From Buddhism, it absorbed compassion, cosmopolitanism, and the role of scholarship in spreading culture. From Islam, it received new languages like Persian, Arabic, architectural styles, and ethical codes of community life. From Sufism, it found its enduring ethos of tolerance, simplicity, and humanism. Together, these influences created Kashmiriyat,
Mhm.
a term not just political but deeply civilizational. It signifies a way of life where multiple faiths coexisted, borrowing from one another and shaping a collective identity. You know, so this is the basic essence of Kashmiriyat.
Mhm.
Kashmiriyat is not just a one religion or one community or one language. Kashmiriyat, like the number of dynasties which came into Kashmir right from the first millennium till date, and till the Dogra rule, I would say. And when they came, they brought various religions. When they came, they brought various cultures, different type of prayers, different type of livelihood. All these things bound together
Mm.
is called Kashmiriyat. It's uh, unity in diversity, you can say. That is why.
I think you have explained it really well. Is those who are listening to this, they will really understand now what does that Kashmiriyat means. It's not something which is only religion or it's not only culture. It's a mix of everything. It's a unity in diversity. It's a inclusive way of life.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the second question that I wanted to ask you before we proceed to your book is that, when we talk about conflict about Kashmir or conflict in Kashmir, we generally tend to think that it is something which started when India was partitioned in India and Pakistan. Is that a correct understanding, or it is something which goes far beyond that?
It is certainly far beyond that. It's a very wrong notion. And this wrong notion uh, comes into one mind uh, with what has been actually told to you. What you see, a movie comes on Kashmir, you go and watch it. So whatever is shown in the movie, immediately you imbibe it.
Hmm.
You register it. When you don't know the background, so whatever you see, immediately you register it. So
Hmm.
that becomes the base,
Hmm.
which is absolutely incorrect.
Hmm.
So that is the reason in this book Kashmira, I have tried to bring in everything right from the first millennium onwards till date as to what all happened in Kashmir and how it is very late, that one realizes as to what is the actual genesis of the problem. That what is happening between India and Pakistan came up in 1947.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that means the problem of Kashmir should be only after 47.
Yeah.
But the actual problem started much before that.
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan Pakistan only started exploiting
Okay.
those problems and started inflating the issue globally.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the problem, see, with various dynasties uh, coming into Kashmir, I will talk about, let's say, uh, the Sikh rule.
Mm-hmm.
When the Sikh rule came in after the Afghans,
Mm-hmm.
when the Sikh defeated the Afghans, and they started their rule sometimes in early 1819, I presume. That is the time when the Sikh. And uh, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was the Maharaja that time, uh, looking after the complete Punjab and the Jammu and Kashmir, the entire area was under him. He was the Maharaja. Now, under him was a Dogra ruler, Raja Gulab Singh. He was a very senior general under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Subsequently, what happened uh, during the Anglo-Sikh War? During the Anglo-Sikh War in 1846, uh, uh, the Dogras, the Dogras, uh, who were very close to the British.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during that Anglo-Sikh War, the Britishers had gained the entire control.
Mm-hmm.
They had gained the entire control. Now, since Raja Gulab Singh was close to the Britishers, he bought Kashmir
Mm-hmm.
for 75 lakh rupees.
Okay.
The entire Kashmir
Mm-hmm.
was purchased by Raja Gulab Singh for 75 lakh rupees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he became the king of Jammu and Kashmir state.
Okay.
So, whereas all the dynasties who came into Kashmir, they fought, won, captured.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here,
He just
the
bought.
Dogras, they bought Kashmir. They did not win
Hmm.
against the Sikhs.
Okay.
They bought Kashmir from
Hmm.
the British.
Okay.
Okay. So that is one point which I want to highlight. Now, second is once they started ruling Kashmir, April 1865, there was uh, a shawl weavers movement, a
Hmm.
big agitation
Hmm.
uh, due to oppressive taxation and restrictions on trade.
Hmm. Hmm.
There were many locals were killed in that. A
Hmm.
lot of people were killed in that. That was another point uh, uh, of uh, major problem during the Dogra rule. Then July 1924, July 1924, the laborers' agitation.
Hmm.
Here again, the same issue took place and lot of people were killed.
Hmm.
Dogras were carrying out their reign with the blessings of the British,
Hmm.
not realizing as to what is actually happening on ground.
Hmm.
Subsequently, the watershed movement, what I call as the watershed movement, came in July 1931, to
Hmm.
be exact, 13 July 1931, which is, as even today, it is called as Martyrs' Day.
Hmm.
It is called as Martyrs' Day. 13 July 1931, demonstrators gathered astride the Srinagar Central Jail,
Hmm.
protesting execution of a Kashmiri youth
Hmm.
accused of sedition. That Kashmiri youth, Abdul Qadir, he was uh, a cook. He was a cook in a Britisher's house,
Hmm.
and he probably spoke something
Hmm.
as to his people are not being looked after.
Hmm.
Everybody is enjoying in palaces,
Hmm.
whereas the locals are having a tough time.
Hmm.
So he was put into jail, and on the basis of on the grounds of sedition, he was being executed. Now everybody started protesting against it. Police opened fire, resulting in death of 22 men.
Hmm.
This became actually the watershed moment,
Hmm.
and the that time, if you actually feel the pulse, one can imagine now, after having seen all such issues in
Hmm.
the country, one can imagine the pulse. That is the time when the issue of Islamic
Okay.
protest, the I would humbly call it right now as protest, started.
Hmm.
Okay, that is how. And that time, Sheikh Abdullah said, the Maharaja rules, but the people who suffer,
Hmm.
we demand that the tiller of the soil be the owner of the soil.
Hmm. Okay.
This act of martyrdom crystallized the valley's political awakening, transforming grief into the organized demand
Hmm.
for rights and representations.
Okay. Okay.
So slowly, steadily, this protest, it took the root of radicalization.
Okay. Okay. So,
And when the country got partitioned,
hmm.
India got independent, Pakistan became a separate country,
Hmm.
and the entire Pakistan did not go to entire Kashmir did not go to Pakistan. So Pakistan had that feeling, had that grudge,
Hmm.
and it was always demanding that Kashmir should come back to Pakistan, as a case you may call as a self-determination rhetoric, I would say.
Hmm. 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 Okay. So
So
you have,
that is what
yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
that, yeah. So that is the main issue, and slowly, steadily, it started taking a wrong route.
Okay.
A protest became a battlefield now.
Okay.
So this is the actual genesis, the actual uh, problem area,
Oh.
what most of us are not aware of. We only feel that the problem with problem of Kashmir started in 1989 when the militancy started.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you have put it in right perspective. This will help viewers to understand the Kashmir issue in much better fashion. Coming to your book, one question I wanted to ask you is that this book spans from, I think, Samrat Ashok to today. How did you carry out the research over such a vast period and able to bring all the perspectives or all the aspects into one book?
Yes, it is very difficult, no doubt in it. It is, see, what I have written in the book is not even, I would say, 1/100th of what I have read or understood.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, my aim of writing this book was to cover the details, but
Mm,
not in that entirety.
mm,
Otherwise, I would have written volumes on it. My book Kashmir wouldn't have just finished off
mm.
in 300 pages.
Yeah.
Okay, I have given chapters to my book, and with each chapter, I have tried to cover whatever best details I could.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So, this book that you have written, and as you said, it covers the history from Samrat Ashok to today. Who is expected to read this book? To whom are you targeting as a reader?
This book readership can be of any age, can be of anybody serving anywhere. Could be a military man, could be a school student, could be a college student, could be a bureaucrat, could be a politician, could be a geostrategist, could be anybody, because it encompasses everything about geography, history, the geo political status, then the cultures, then the wars that have been fought in and for Kashmir,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, the best part, as on today, as to why India wants to keep Kashmir,
Mm,
why Pakistan wants Kashmir,
mm,
what is the interest of China in Kashmir,
mm,
and finally, the voices of Kashmir as to what a Kashmiri wants,
mm, mm.
which is most important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all these things have been collected,
Mm, mm,
and they have been put in the right, uh, in the correct, in the right earnest and spirit
mm,
for people to understand. I
mm,
have not written this book uh, with a biased attitude or with a biased mind.
mm, mm,
I have been uh, uh, a,
mm,
wit- a, a witness to
mm,
uh, contradictions.
mm,
I've collected all of them and
mm,
placed them in the book.
mm. So it's an unbiased view or unbiased story of Kashmir as it has evolved over a period of centuries.
Exactly, exactly.
And how has been the response to the book, and more particularly from the decision makers, whether it is in government or whether it is in army? What has been the response that you have received?
See, the book has been in circulation. Uh, it is doing well. I have got good reviews
Mm-hmm.
from the people who have read it. They say it gives uh, a very clear picture about Kashmir. The things we did not know about, we have learned from this book. They've been very happy to read it. And from the decision makers or the policy makers, I am not in contact with them, to be very honest. But what I can say is that the forward of the book
Hmm.
has been written. The forward of the book has been written by General B.S. Raju.
Yes.
He retired as the Vice Chief of
Yes.
Indian Army. I requested him to write the forward, not just because that he was a general,
Hmm.
just because he was one such general who, right from his company commander days,
Hmm.
right as a young major, onwards till the general, he
Mm,
has commanded a company,
mm.
commanded a battalion,
Okay.
commanded a brigade,
Okay.
commanded a division, commanded a corps.
Okay.
He
Okay.
was the Director General Military Operations
Mm-hmm.
of the Indian Army.
Okay.
So he had such a vast exposure to
Mm.
Kashmir right from his youngster days
Okay.
till Vice Chief when he
Mm.
retired.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he was the right man
Mm.
to uh, judge my book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I spoke to him and I requested him if he could write forward to my book,
Mm.
he asked for the manuscript. So when I sent him the manuscript, and he would have gone through it, of course.
Yeah.
So I was quite taken aback that he did not make any changes in that. He
Mm.
did not even question me, and he was quite happy with it. And
Mm.
he said, "Okay, Madhur, it's very good. Go ahead."
Okay. I think that is the
So I
biggest
take it.
compliment.
Say again.
I said that is the biggest compliment.
Yes, it's a big compliment. And apart from that, I take it that I was on the right lines.
Yes. Yes.
I was on the absolutely right path when I was writing this book. Uh,
Okay. So we are actually running out of time. But before we wrap it up, I have one question. Very briefly, what are your future plans?
my future plans, I am writing a book, and it is almost, uh, I would say, it is ready because that book, uh, I've changed the banter now from getting into history or more sophisticated thinking or all those issues. Now I'm getting more towards the humor side.
Okay. Okay.
So now my next book, which is coming out maybe after 3 4 months, it should be out.
Okay.
I'm calling it The Accidental Humorist.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
So,
so as
uh,
a soldier
hmm.
turned writer, I aim to deliver
Okay.
hilarious reflections
Okay.
on the army actions,
Okay.
civilian confusions, bureaucratic adventures,
Yeah. Yeah.
and universal comedy of being human.
Okay. So
Uh,
we will actually look forward to that book, and once that is published, then again we would request you to appear on the show next time again. So
yes, yes, sure, sure. Why
that,
not?
that
Why
will be
not? It
our
will be a great pleasure.
that will be our privilege. So that was Colonel Madhur Goyal for all of us, a veteran army man with deep experience and a flair for writing, who has talked about he has written a book on Kashmir, which actually should be a guide to everyone who has interest in Kashmir. That brings us to the end of today's show. If you missed any part of the show, then it will be recorded and uploaded on the YouTube channel of Kala at Sanjay Chandra 5376. And with that, we come to an end and wish you a very safe day and safe future. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vardhanji.